So when I got the job in NZSO, I started doing a little bit of conducting at Victoria University. I started an orchestral repertoire class, and it was a nice outlet for a while. Then I started doing what I call this 20th Century Classics Ensemble, using my colleagues from the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra, and every international festival for a while there, I was doing a concert, and that was also an outlet for my conducting ambitions, I suppose. After a while, I started knocking on the NZSO's door and saying, you know, please look at me as a conductor. I'd love to conduct. And finally, in 1996, they relented, probably just to shut me up, and they gave me what was a tea and symphony concert. That's what they called them back then, hour-long concerts. And I did a Brahms and Wagner concert, did Brahms Academic Festival Overture and Academic Festival and Tragic Overture, and the Prelude to Act 3 of Lohengrin, and the Prelude and Liebestod from Tristan. And it went quite well, and they started using me more. And also as a result of that, the Christchurch Symphony started using me, and the Auckland Philharmonia started using me. So by 1999, I found myself working as hard as a conductor as I was as a trombone player. And I really started thinking, well, maybe this is where my life in music should go. And in 2000, Ian Fraser was very supportive of me. He was very kind enough to let me take a year's leave from the orchestra and see what happened. And at that time, I was principal guest of the Christchurch Symphony Orchestra. And right before I had to make my decision whether I was going to leave the NZSO or go back to it, the Christchurch Symphony offered me the music directorship. And I just thought, well, this is a sign, and I need to go for it. I don't want to end up on my deathbed, having a regret, like, oh, if only I had become a conductor. So now I'll know, on my deathbed if it was the right choice or not. But at least I will have backed myself as a conductor.
That must have been fairly scary, though, because New Zealand's a very small pond for a conductor to make a living in.
It was scary. The NZSO is a well-paid orchestra, and it's a paycheck every fortnight. But the fact that I had the Christchurch Symphony music directorship, I was also associate conductor of the Auckland Philharmonia. I had quite a bit of work going on at that time, so I was fairly certain that I could make a go of it.
The impact you had in Christchurch was pretty big with the CSO.
Yeah.
6 years there as their music director, repertoire, audience building,
right.
And anybody who looks at it sees it as a success story. What do you put that down to?
When I came into the Christchurch Symphony, their audience share was going down year by year, and they were combating that, or trying to combat that, by piling on the Tchaikovsky, piling on the Beethoven, the Brahms, etc., and yet, well, basically doing the same old thing all the time. And oddly enough, the audience numbers were going down. So for me, I put that down to the fact that, well, you can't do the same thing all the time. Basically, I saw them as pandering to an audience, and I don't believe that's what an audience wants. I think an audience wants to be guided into new musical vistas. They want to be inspired. Of course they want to hear Tchaikovsky 6. Who doesn't? It's one of the sublime works in the Western canon. But there are ways of presenting works such as that enervate them, energize them, maybe give them more relevance to a contemporary listener. And that's what I try to do. I try to find links between the great masterpieces and maybe lesser known masterpieces. So for me, it's about building the trust of an audience and delivering on that.
Marc, with the Christchurch Orchestra, you obviously saw making CDs as an important statement. Why?
Well, I think the challenges the Christchurch Symphony have, or had, or will have, are shared by all the regional orchestras. It's one, the New Zealand has the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra, the national orchestra. It's by far the best orchestra in the country, full-time orchestra, full-time pay. It gets the lion's share of the arts funding in the country. So I saw as my job in Christchurch as a way of just sort of getting the message that this orchestra is excellent, and it deserves respect, and as a corollary to respect, it deserves the support of our audience, not just in Christchurch, but within the entire country. And I saw CDs as a way of getting that out there. And I mean, I'm proud to say that Concert FM still plays the recordings that we made. And there are more recordings coming out next year that I made in my last couple of years as music director there. They're just still waiting to be pressed, I suppose.
Well, you have some sort of a legacy in Christchurch, really, and it continues because you're still guesting there.
That's right.
But you've moved to Wellington, back to Wellington,
Yes.
to be music director of the Wellington Orchestra,
Yeah.
right in the heartland of the NZSO. Now, there's one kind of a challenge.
It is a challenge. I'd like to say that all the regional orchestras have the same challenge to a greater or lesser extent. For instance, the Auckland Philharmonia has to have the NZSO coming in every single month. The NZSO comes in, does a number of, excuse me, a number of concerts. I'm happy to say that in Christchurch, the NZSO is actually not coming there quite as much as they once did, and I'd like to think that's because of some of the success that we've had taking market share away from the NZSO. But in Wellington, the issue is particularly acute because we are literally next door to the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra. Now, both Auckland and Christchurch, they can depend on the support of their communities. And so it is in Wellington also, but sometimes I think that the Wellington community feels the NZSO is their orchestra, when of course it's everyone's orchestra, it's the nation's orchestra. And it also disregards the fact that the Wellington Orchestra plays to far more people in the Wellington region than the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra does. So yes, it's a real challenge, and for me, the way I've combated that thus far is making a point of difference both in programming, the choices of artists, etc., etc. I try to see gaps in what the NZSO is doing, and I try to fill those gaps. But even in our main series programs, they're programs that the NZSO probably would never devise. And we're building a following because of that, much in the same way that we did in Christchurch. I'd like to say that what's good for the Wellington Orchestra, or the Christchurch Symphony, the Auckland Philharmonia, or the Southern Symphonia is good for the NZSO, and vice versa. I think we're complementary to one another. And if there's any competition, I'd like to say I'm not going to say what the competition is here. I'd say go hear our concerts. Let the results speak for themselves. I think that's the best arena for these debates.
Music survives in New Zealand, classical music, only really because of